Welcome to the School of Batman, a podcast where we ask academics to help Batman fight crime using their research. I'm your host, Chris George, amateur scientist and professional Batman enthusiast. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the case of the fear chase. We're pleased to be joined by Lewis Mitchell.
Hello.
Who has a PhD in applied mathematics from the University of Sydney, was a postdoctoral fellow in the mathematics of climate at the University of Vermont, and is currently a lecturer in applied mathematics at the University of Adelaide. So Lewis, we'd like to start the podcast with some background on yourself, how you got to be where you are today, what inspired some of your choices, what did you enjoy as a kid, some of the details about your research. So yeah, tell us about yourself.
Sure. Well, if we're going to go all the way back to when I was a kid, I didn't originally want to be a mathematician at all. I wanted to be Indiana Jones, actually. So I'm going to tell you how old I am through all of this. I wanted to be an archaeologist, but then I realized that an archaeologist wasn't really being Indiana Jones, and I found that I was quite good at math, so I sort of enjoyed that, so I pursued that. So I did my PhD in applied mathematics on the mathematics of weather, and then was lucky enough to get a postdoctoral fellowship overseas at the University of Vermont in the US. And I was meant to be working on the mathematics of climate and weather there as well, but found myself embedded in this lab that looked at social media and studied things like happiness on Twitter and things like this. And this just, I found this fascinating and fun. So I sort of started dabbling in it, and then it became most of what I did. And so then when I came back to Australia, that became my primary research. So a lot of what I do now is studying social networks and online social media and tracking things and looking at trends on that.
So what's applied mathematics? What does the applied bring to the table?
Applied means that you're problem solving. You're looking at something that's out there in the real world, like how a disease spreads or how weather happens, or problems in biology or even in psychology now, or anything that you can see out there in the world, and you're making assumptions about it. You're trying to build a mathematical model of that thing and see if it gives you any insight into what's going on, and see if you can make predictions about things out there in the real world. So it means you end up modeling a lot of things. Trying to understand real-world problems, doing lots of computer programming, simulating things, looking at data. So it's a bit of a mix between sort of pure mathematical things that you would have learnt at school, so calculus and linear algebra and all of these things, a bit of computer programming, a bit of data. It's a bit of a mix of everything, actually.
Right, so is pure mathematics the opposite of applied mathematics, and those are the two sides of the coin?
I wouldn't say that entirely. So, in some sense, all mathematics is applied in that, everything comes from trying to understand the world better, and a lot of mathematics has its root in physics and modelling things out there in the real world. So it's a bit of a continuum between pure mathematics and applied mathematics, I think. But pure mathematics is really math for the sake of math. So, trying to apply logical deductive reasoning to prove new theorems, to prove new results just in mathematics, just in and of itself, and almost like philosophy, sort of following that chain of reasoning as far as it can go. Whereas I'm sort of not imaginative enough for that in some ways. I need to be tethered to the real world. So I like to study things that I can see and I can talk about to people on podcasts and things.
I appreciate you taking that path. I think that pure mathematics aspect is what people imagine a career in mathematics to be. I always find it very interesting when people talk about how they apply mathematics to real world problems. And the problem that you mentioned there at the start, applying mathematics to climate and weather. Can you tell us what that involves?
Firstly, I guess the movies have done us a bit of a disservice in teaching us in the general public about what mathematics is, because your conception of mathematics is this person who's slaving away over a piece of paper or at a blackboard or something like this, proving some unknowable, very complicated, indescribable thing. And that's not really what mathematics is like at all. It's really, at least in the stuff that I do, is really a team effort. So, for example, taking something like climate and modeling the weather, really the mathematical theories of that came about from people talking to meteorologists, and it is sort of intrinsically mathematical because we have these equations which describe fluid flow, which have been around for a long time and which have been well studied and well understood by mathematicians. And we know that the atmosphere is essentially, the movement of fluids, movement of air and water and moisture around the atmosphere, and transport of heat, things like this. And this is what creates weather, and this is what creates climate. But at the intersection of those two things, some really interesting things happen. So, the mathematics of chaos theory. So, this notion that when a butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil, it causes a storm in London or something like this. This comes from thinking about how the mathematical equations of weather act when certain equations act when you simulate them on a computer, when you make very, very tiny changes to the initial conditions, to the starting values that you put into those models. So there's this great synergy between things like weather prediction and climate prediction and mathematical theories as well. And one sort of feeds into the others, and advances in one generate advances in the other.
I have a question I've always wanted to ask someone about this, actually, so it's very fortuitous that this was your area of research. Is kind of maths and climate ultimately like a knowable system? Like, could you get to the point where if the maths was good enough and the computational power was good enough, where you could properly 100% predict weather for X amount of days, weeks, months ahead?
That is a very deep question, and the answer to that is really no. It's quite amazing, and this is sort of the essence of chaos theory. So, chaos theory came around because Ed Lorenz was running a simulation of the weather on a computer, and he specified the starting values for that model as precisely as he could, and set the thing running and got some result out, and then he ran the same program again with all the same numbers put into it, precisely the same calculation on a computer, which can't make any mistakes, and got different results out. And the thing was that sort of machine level error or differences in the computer, so deep in the bowels of the computer, where some random one gets flipped to a 0 or something like this at some very, very deep level, propagates upwards in those equations and makes the thing inherently sort of unpredictable. So in weather and in climate, there are these limits of predictability where beyond a certain point, you can't predict exactly, even with a completely deterministic system with a completely sort of rational set of equations. It's got no randomness or anything. You can't predict what's going to happen, and that's really the essence of chaos. So it's actually no. So we can never predict with 100% accuracy down to the finest scales what's going to happen into the future, which is this caused a big revolution in science and in mathematics, but it's quite exciting, I think.
So just based on absolutely nothing, it feels like weather predictions have been getting better as kind of years go on. Are we at that point of hitting, I can't remember exactly the term you said, predictability? Are we getting close to that point of hitting the limits of predictability through mathematical improvements, computational improvements, or is there still some kind of gap between where we are today and where we are that's theoretically and computationally and financially responsible to get to?
Let's see. There are a few different answers to that question. So weather prediction is getting better and better over time. It's one of the success stories of prediction in general, I think. It's difficult to predict some things like elections and stuff like this, but weather is something where we're getting better and better. And part of the reason is the increasing computational power. We can resolve these equations down to finer and finer scales, and we have more and more information, more and more weather, observations and different types of ways of observing that we can feed into these models to predict better and better. But there's also advances in the way that we incorporate that data, those observations that we take from weather stations, into these mathematical models as well. So some of the big increases in prediction power in weather has come from this process called data assimilation, which is the process by which you take observations from weather stations and feed them into your weather models so that you can improve the forecasts. So you can actually make very good forecasts, some days, weeks out into the future. And a lot of it is due to the increases in computational power and the increases in mathematical modelling, but some of it's in these processes of how we blend observations and the models together as well.
Fantastic. I think it's a good time for us to dive into your story. So which Batman actor have you chosen to represent your Batman in your story, and any particular reason behind your choice?
Yeah, Batman for me has to be Michael Keaton. Michael Keaton was Batman when I was a kid. So some of my first memories of going to the movies was seeing the original Tim Burton, Michael Keaton Batman movie. And I also watched the Adam West Batman as a kid, and then obviously the darker Christian Bale reboots later on. And for me, Michael Keaton is really that perfect balance between the campness of the original Batman TV series and that darkness of the Christian Bale of Batman as well. So for me, he is the personification of Batman. It can only be him.
Great. Strange stories are coming in from around the globe. Mass paranoia and delusions, depression and fear, whole towns and areas behaving bizarrely and then returning to normality. Batman knows deep in his bones that this has to be the work of the Scarecrow. He's testing something big for a strike on Gotham, but it's a big world and time is not on his side. What can our hero do? So Lewis, what can our hero do? In this time, we've set Batman, he is in the modern era, he's in 2018 and has all the tools and abilities available to him in 2018. How would you help our hero?
Well, the thing that Batman has, he has the Batcave, right? So I think the first thing that he's going to do is go down into the Batcave, and he needs to figure out where this event is happening in the world, so that he can go there and he can start to fight the crime. So the first thing for him is that research. So I envisage Batman when he is sitting down in the Batcave in a big black chair, and he's going to be looking at a screen that shows a huge map of the world, and on this map will be various bits of analysis, and it's going to be sort of his nerve center. It's giving him readouts of all of the information that is piling in from all out around the world, and he needs to synthesize that information and use it to pinpoint where this event is happening.
And so you say information coming in from around the world. What type of information could be available? As I say, it's a big world. It's often divergent. What types of information sources? How would you amalgamate these kind of divergent information sources into something usable?
Yeah, so a lot of the most highest velocity and highest volume data that we have now comes from the internet and comes from things like Google searches and social media. So I would think that if Batman needs to respond quickly, he's going to do what I do when there's a breaking news story, and he's going to go to Twitter. So he's going to look at an open data set like Twitter, and he's going to start to need to analyze the photos and the words that people are writing on social media, posting to their friends about these events, and trying to figure out what's going on.
So what does an open data set mean? So
an open data set just means one that is freely available. So a lot of the research that scientists like me do at the moment is on open data sets that are freely available, like Twitter. where you can search for any word that you want. So any post that gets made on Twitter is public, and so those are all accessible to researchers and to marketers too, of course. So there's that. There's Google search trends. So Google makes available aggregated statistics about the things that people are searching for every day. And there's some things that you might not have thought of, and there's things like Wikipedia access logs. So you can find out who has been accessing what Wikipedia page from different countries, different places all around the world, and in different languages. So there's a very rich high volume data set that you can use here to try and find out things in real time.
So just going back to that Twitter example, my experience of Twitter is searching for things on my phone, looking for stuff on a browser. I'm not sure I get the connection between that and calling Twitter an open data set. So how does that become usable?
Okay, so this is where we get down into it a little bit more. So the stuff that I've done in relation to Twitter has been around this, studying happiness, or what the computer scientists call sentiment analysis. So we've looked at geotag tweets. So roughly 1% of all public tweets that people write are geotagged, which means that they're authored from a phone or from a computer, and the person has opted to share their location. And so then you can identify if it's on a phone with GPS enabled down to about 10 meters or so where the tweet is coming from. So, and this is where the map comes in. So I would imagine that if there was some disease outbreak in some area, then a lot of people are going to pull out their phones, they're going to start tweeting or start messaging about that event, and the sorts of language that people are going to use. They might be talking about disasters or bomb strikes or terrorist acts or something like this. They're going to use certain types of words, which would probably be not very happy words. They might be talking about Christmas and things like this. They're going to be talking about these sad words. So what we've done in this realm is we have a dictionary. We have a list of words. So the top 10,000 words that people use online. And each of these words are scored for happiness. So from being a positive word like Christmas or laughter to a sad word like terrorism or cancer or earthquake, something like this, which gets a very low score. And so I imagine that if Batman were, was using his computers to slurp in all of these tweets, perform this sentiment analysis, so calculate these scores for these tweets and locate them to different regions, that this would start to become a heat map, and so you would see a certain area of the globe start to flash red, perhaps with where the crisis is.
So we can assume Batman has all the money in the world and the best tech in the world, which I'd imagine you would enjoy having that as your research environment. If we can assume he has all of the languages and he has a full language map of happy words, because obviously not everybody is going to be searching in English and all of that type of thing. Because I understand how what you're saying would work with the idea of an event, like a terrorist attack or a virus outbreak. But the thing that we're looking at here is something more subtle. These scarecrow poisons are elevating people's paranoia. They're elevating maybe delusions. They're elevating kind of depression and fear. So that kind of thing intuitively needs a baseline to me. So how would you try and tackle that problem? Because would it simply be a case of you have a constant analysis going since day dot, and then that thus would allow you to see trends?
Well, yeah. So I mean, Batman doesn't even need to build this himself. The project that I was part of during my postdoc in Vermont was called this Hedonometer project, and it's online at hedonometer.org, so people can go there and what we have is like a daily stock ticker of the happiness of the Twitter sphere, and you can see this on a day-by-day level, what this aggregate happiness score is for all of the tweets which that group in Vermont collects, which is roughly 10% of all of the public tweets. And so they calculate, slope in all of the words and calculate this one number summary, this one number happiness score, and that gives you the baseline for what is the background, sort of the background level for how happy this social media population is. And so you see it go up and down. On Christmas Day it spikes up. When somebody famous dies, so when Michael Jackson or Robin Williams died, you saw it drop down, and you see various ups and downs, but that would give you the baseline. So I think if Batman has that, then when something unusual happens, you would see a change in this signal, and then he needs to go in and delve and see, what's going on here? Is this something unusual, or is this an earthquake or something that the governments are well prepared for? So what he's going to do then is, instead of just looking at this one number summary, he needs to look at the words that are driving that change. So he needs to compare the words that are being written on social media in Gotham City to the words in the rest of the country as a whole. And he might see that certain words are elevated, so maybe fear, paranoia, just things that don't make sense. Maybe the word scarecrow is up, something like this, and then that's going to be the clue for him that this is something that's very anomalous.
So we talked about a bunch of different sources. Would it be the idea that the more sources you have, the more accurate a picture you will be able to get? Or would it mean that you would get more noise and you might get a more distorted picture? And how would you begin to flatten and the information sources so you could come up with like a cohesive heat map or a cohesive score?
So Batman would have a range of different measures that he is looking at. He might be looking at the Twitter or the social media sphere. He might be looking at people's Google searches, so the words they're typing in there, and then he needs to do some sort of model fusion. So look for correlations between these different data sources, and when there is some sort of alignment between these different trends, then that might lend him further evidence that something's really going on. So I would think that he would use automatically a mathematical tool called correlation. Calculate a correlation, which basically says it's a number that is high when two patterns look the same, and is a small number when two patterns look different, when two things are going in opposite directions. So if he starts to see a correlation between all of these different data sources that he's looking at, then that's the piece of evidence I think he needs to get in the Batmobile and head out to ground zero.
Right, so we can assume he's got the best tech, the best models, the best everything. So he's got these models doing all of that work for him, and suddenly we get a flash on the heat map.
So the great thing for him is that the models are there. The models are just mathematics. To some extent, they're free, and like the sentiment analysis, the word lists and things like this are free. So the thing that he needs the money for, and this is a very Bruce Wayne thing, I think, is he needs the computational power. So he needs the computers and the storage and and basically the computers to be able to slurp in this data and analyze it in very fast. So it's something that's very achievable for Batman to be able to buy that sort of raw compute to be able to do this.
So with all that power, he's got that heat map flash up on the map. So you see, he gets in the Batmobile and he's off to try and find this latest outbreak. There's clearly been some kind of test. People are going crazy in this town. He gets to this town. What does he do? He arrives in a town. What could he possibly do next? Is there anything your research could do to help him next?
Apart from finding Scarecrow and battling him and vanquishing him, there's still an issue, right? Even if he vanquishes Scarecrow, that the people are still sick, right? Like they need to be they need to have an antidote applied, or they need to be vaccinated against this now disease that's spreading out amongst the population. So he needs to figure out a way to distribute the vaccines or the cures for this fear disease in an efficient manner, as efficient a manner as possible. So if you're going to vaccinate a population, a disease spreads by contact, right? So what you really want to do is you really want to find the people who are coming in contact with the most people, and you vaccinate them, you cure them, and then they can't infect the large numbers of people around them. So he needs to find the hubs in the population, he needs to vaccinate them. So how does he find those people? Well, one thing is he could just hand out vaccines, or he could hand out the cure just randomly to people. But there's something a bit better that he can do. So it turns out, I'm talking about a social network here, and in networks there's something called the friendship paradox, which says basically your friends are more popular than you are. So if you count up the number of friends that you have, and then you ask each of your friends how many friends they have, on average you'll find that your friends have got more friends than you do yourself. And that's just a fact about social networks. It applies to all of us. It's just too bad. Sorry, Chris, your friends have more friends than you do. And so do mine. I'm
going to have to stop you there. That makes no sense. Could you talk us through how that can possibly work?
Sure. If you imagine, this social network as every sort of dot in the network is a person, and every friend puts a connection, a link between the different people, the different nodes in this network. So long as every person doesn't have exactly the same number of friends, so some people have got more friends than others, then if you count up the number of friends, you do some double counting. So if you and I have a friend in common, let's say someone called Megan, then if you count the number of my friends, then it's, let's say it's 2, because I've got you and Megan are my friends. And if I count up your friends, you have Megan as a friend, but you might have other people as your friend. And if Megan is a very, very popular person, then she's got lots of friends, right? So Megan is friends with both of us, and she's very, very popular, right? So if we count up the number of friends, if we do this for everybody in the population, then we do some double counting of this very popular person, Megan. So we count up her friends, multiple times. And so that means that if you count up people's friends of friends, we do double counting of Megan, and that means friends of your friends. Your friends tend to have more friends than you do. So it's called a friendship paradox. It is, the paradox means it's slightly counterintuitive, but mathematically it's quite simple, and it's just true. And it means that on average, your friends are more popular than you are.
And that assumes a finite number of people within the network. It's not a changing network. If you take a snapshot at any moment, that is always true.
It's actually, it's very, very general, this paradox, or this theorem, I guess you could call it. It holds in any type of network except very, very strange ones where everybody has the same number of friends. So this has been proven in a number of different cases. So the original study dates back to 1991, and it looked at a high school. So somebody went out and counted the number of friends that all the children in the playground had, and then counted the number of friends that they had, and found this. It's been shown on Facebook. We've shown that this holds on Twitter to a very extreme degree. It holds in mobile phone networks and things like this. So this is certainly an empirical fact.
Apologies for interrupting, but that was too weird not to get you to explain more. But so utilising this, how can that help?
Right. Okay. So now we come back to disease spread. So diseases spread on these social networks. They spread between friends. Is fact number 1. And you want to try and cure the highly connected people, right? So the disease can't spread. So how do you achieve that? Instead of giving a random person on the street the cure for the disease and saying, inject that into your arm that will cure you, that will stop the disease spreading. So randomly allocating these vaccines or these cures out in the population. Batman's going to do something very, very tricky, and it seems a bit cruel at first. So what he's going to do is he's going to go up to somebody onto the street, and he's going to say, here's a cure for the disease. Don't take it yourself. Give it to one of your friends. So he's going to actually exploit this fact that he knows that if he gets somebody random on the street, that their friends are more likely to be more popular, to have more contacts, and to be better people to vaccinate than the person themselves. So you can actually exploit this friendship paradox to help slow or to help stop the spread of the disease. So paradoxically, he is going to vaccinate the friends of the people on the street, or ask them to spread the vaccine on like that, to try and stop the spread of the scarecrow's fear virus or rage virus or whatever it is, quicker than if he was just trying to do it himself or directly. I guess the interesting thing to end off with all about this is everything that I've just described uses quite elementary maths, as it turns out. Nothing much beyond high school maths. So this stuff that I've been talking about is actually not as mysterious or as impossible to get into as people think. So, and mathematics is actually applied mathematics can be actually pretty understandable, pretty tractable, and pretty useful as well. So this way of vaccinating people via the friendship paradox, people are actually doing this out in the world. People are actually doing experiments to show that this can help us actually vaccinate populations and slow diseases down. So this stuff is not as otherworldly as it seems, and B, it's actually really useful.
So utilising these models, the day is saved again. Batman is able to help the people on the ground and catch up with the Scarecrow before he launches his big strike on Gotham. So thanks for listening, and thanks to Lewis Mitchell for joining us.
Thank you.
You can follow Lewis at Lewis_math, that's LEWIS_math on Twitter. If you'd like to discuss your research on a future episode, email us at info@figshare.com.